So this is the Nonviolent De-Escalation Training. It's part 2, and it should follow the nonviolence training, which is on Facebook, which you will have found on your pathway document. So this is the next stage from that. And this part is on Zoom, and there'll be another training which you'll be doing face-to-face in person. And this is a prelude to that. So the aim of this training is to learn how to create and maintain a container for an atmosphere that's conducive to and supportive of nonviolence. And I'll be explaining what that is, the nonviolent container. To de-escalate drivers and passengers who are angry or upset, and to de-escalate police and or to expose their violence, discerning which of these approaches is appropriate to the situation. And also, finally, to support a rebel who loses self-discipline, should that happen. And also just want to say that non-violence is dangerous. This is no guarantee as to our safety, but it is likely to be the most effective and the least risky of all the methods that we could use. So that's why we're using it. And therefore, because it's not safe, this training also aims for us to learn and also to practice in the face-to-face training how to protect ourselves and how to protect each other from an aggressor, and also what to do if we're being lifted or dragged off the road. And also just to say that this training will probably fail somebody, because in almost every action, there's some kind of casualty, usually an emotional rather than physical casualty, as a result of insufficient preparation. So I just want to emphasize the need to please give the best of your attention and time to doing these trainings on Zoom and in person. So now a very short introduction to nonviolence. You're probably familiar with Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King, who are probably the earliest known practitioners of nonviolence. So that's what most people associate with nonviolence. It defines itself most easily by what it's not, but that doesn't mean it's the same as refraining from violence. And it's because of this that it's usually viewed by activists in one word, or expressed by activists in one word, without hyphens, to indicate that it's both positive and active. So actually, by being positive and active, it also defines itself by what it isn't. So non-violence has been further developed since those times with Gandhi and Martin Luther King by many movements and activists, strategists, thinkers and faith practitioners. And there are many definitions and interpretations and many approaches that have stretched the Overton window on non-violence, all of which is a good thing, I think. Also just to say, non-violent civil disobedience is very much about challenging obedience and questioning authority and power over. It doesn't even necessarily mean breaking the law. It's about breaking social norms and conventions in a way that creates disruption and puts pressure on, strong pressure on for change. An inspiring example of nonviolence can be seen in, there's a really good short film by XR called Waterloo Uprising. And that, especially the second half of the film, is very good in showing the confrontational edge that is an essential part of civil disobedience. So I recommend that to you. Non-violence can be practiced either as a strategy, or some say strategy, tactic, or pragmatic approach, which is a method used because it's most likely to be effective, and also because it tends to be very inclusive of activists of all kinds, whether they have a faith or not, because the other way it can be practiced is as a principle. So that's a method used because it's right, because it's ethical, or because it's in accordance with a faith. So like, for example, it's enacting the will of God, or it's the path of the bodhisattva, or something like that. And activists who follow the principled approach might frame their actions as a prayer, or as poetry, or as art. So those are two approaches, the strategic or the pragmatic approach, and the second one, the principled approach. So you choose the method or the approach that works for you. And I would just bear in mind that activists who follow the principled approach are often the most well-resourced in the long haul, and especially for high stakes actions that involve danger or involve prison. So you might want to bear that in mind. And also, I would suggest that this is a really interesting discussion to have with your group, to discuss the principled and the pragmatic approach, and explore in your group your different approaches, and to recognize each other in your choices there, because you don't all have to agree with each other. Okay, now coming on to a definition of nonviolence. Now there's as many definitions of nonviolence as there are activists, I would say. This one I'm offering, it's very street ready. It's a really good working definition. And it's the idea that creating the conditions for nonviolence during actions is a bit like tuning a stringed musical instrument. So the strings need to be adjusted to the right tension. So not too slack and not too tight is what makes the music. So the tight tension is created by civil disobedience and confrontation without violence or aggression. So such as breaking the law, or breaking norms, or causing disruption. The tension is eased by our intention to do this for the benefit of society, without violence and with respect to everybody. And it's also eased by creating a non-violent container, which I'll be going into further down. So just to give you a bit more of a sense of the too much tension, the too little tension effect. So too much tension is going in the direction of being a bit edgy, right through to being full-on militant. So it can go anywhere along that spectrum. And a typical example of, milder version of too much tension would be when activists and police are facing each other nose to nose with intense and sustained eye contact, so locked with their eyes at each other. And another one, excessive exuberant energy being expressed in some way, dancing, right next to the police, or right next to a car and its occupants. So if you were to dance exuberantly right next to a car that you're blockading, that would be a real wind up and really irritate those people. And then another one would be doing something like drumming on a roadside as the police are approaching. Drumming on a road sign, not side, road sign as the police are approaching, which, you might be tempted to do to create a bit of drama, but it would create too much tension in a situation where there's already tension, there's already the confrontation tension that in a good way, through you doing civil disobedience in that moment, through you sitting in the road and blocking traffic. That's quite enough confrontation. You don't need to add to it by drumming on the road sign. So examples of too little tension is being a bit passive, a bit flaccid, and being obedient, right through to being completely apathetic is the far end of that spectrum. And completely compliant. So an example of this would be that you ask permission rather than telling the police what you're going to do. that you just follow police orders to the extent that you give ground in some way, or to decide to do some other kind of action that fails to escalate the strategy. So, for example, if you decide that actually maybe it's not such a good idea to block the traffic and let's just have a demo at the side of the road, which would be, de-escalating in a bad way, because you're not keeping the pressure up to create change. So that's too little tension. So when you're in your in-person workshop, you're going to be exploring this what I call being non-violent, being violent, or just not being violent, as it might manifest in our own action. And you'll be doing this on a spectrum line. And I also want to refer you to the previous talk, which goes in much more detail into these three, what can I call it? Well, three directions in a way, that you've got violence on the one hand, and opposite to that, you've got not being violent on the spectrum line, rather than non-violent. So you've got violent and not being violent. And the non-violence is actually not in between. It's actually something that's outside of the framework in a way, and yet it's informed by those two positions. It informs itself as not being violent, and it also informs itself as not being passive, which is what happens in the not being violent end of the spectrum. So you'll be exploring that more in person on the spectrum line. And I also want to explain that these 3 points of the spectrum, they have a gravitational pull, rather like a planet. And that when an action is within the orbit of any of those 3 planets, they tend to accrue certain characteristics when they're in that orbit. Yeah, this is also explained in much more detail in the previous workshop about nonviolence. So if you haven't seen it, it's probably worth watching that before you continue with this training. So now I want to go into how nonviolence also works a bit like a magic word. In Extinction Rebellion, we talk about naming, claiming, and framing our actions to be nonviolent. Because when we do that, we invoke the successful history and the legendary heroes of nonviolence in people's minds. And so ideally, nonviolence should be this obviously visible core value of our rebellion. In our situation, the naming and claiming is not being done by those of us who are taking part in the action. It's being done much more by people who are doing the press work and the sort of publicity work, the information work that we're doing around the campaign. So now I want to go more into how to create a nonviolent container. This is an area in which we take action. And so it's the physical area. So if you're blocking a road, it's the physical area around you, around where you're sitting, which probably has no visible boundaries. Maybe you've got your bags or something like that that might create a bit of a boundary. But even if there were no boundaries at all, it would be somehow noticeable, discernible by anyone who's in that sort of vicinity, that this is an area where a different thing is happening. And this is something that can be seen much more clearly in the situation of the Extinction Rebellion. When the rebellions are happening on the street, when there's an action happening, you can discern that there's an action happening, usually with a lot of color and music and drama and so on. We won't be doing so much of that. We'll be doing, the container in our situation will be a much more subtle affair. but nevertheless, it should be discernible. And the point of the nonviolent container is that it can, I'm just going to have a sip of tea because I'm really thirsty. And oh, I should have mentioned that this is, this needs a slide. Yeah, so that's a slide should go up now to go through all this material. Yeah, so creating this nonviolent container, it can bring a sense of community and a sense of solidarity. It can demonstrate caring for each other. So caring is something that really supports nonviolence. Whether or not you're in receipt of caring, it doesn't matter. If people can see that other people are caring for each other, that creates an ambience that supports nonviolence. And so it frames a nonviolent ambience in a way that can be discerned. And that this reduces the likelihood of violence. And it also opens people's minds, and it also hopefully really touches their hearts as we model the change that we want to manifest in the world. That people are moved by that. And it supports this skillful level of tension to maintain calm and yet also to enable the non-violent confrontation to take place without any violence. So, another cup of tea. And we need the next slide now. And I'm going to go into some examples of this framing of non-violence and creating a non-violent container. So what we're doing right now is part of that framing. We're doing a training in how to do non-violent de-escalation, and we're deepening our understanding of non-violence. So that is going to play out in our situation when we do the action, and will feed into the container. We have our group agreements on how we behave. And if you're not familiar with these, you can check them out. You'll see a reference to them in the pathway document, our agreements. You can wear visible and colourful patches that say non-violence on them, on your clothes, taking care to not overdo it with the patches, but something that indicates non-violence is quite good in just indicating to anyone that sees us what we're about. Speaking slowly, keeping the voice low, and making your movements calm, so not running, for example. That also supports non-violence. And singing is very good. We won't be using musical instruments because in our situation, it could look too provocative. If we look as though we're having a great time at the expense of everybody else, it's not going to inspire much empathy in them. But singing amongst each other, I think, that's about as, as musical as we can get. And I think that will support the non-violent container. And demonstrating caring behavior. So for example, by offering fruit and snacks, offering bottles of water if people need that. Also, if it comes to it, if somebody needs to use the toilet, maybe we could provide a couple of sheets or cloths, about the size of sheets, to be held for their privacy. Even if nobody uses them or nobody accepts any of the things that we're offering, the fact that we offer them, that's the point, because it's indicating our caring behavior. And people will be, it opens people's hearts a little bit, at least, if we do that. And then going floppy when being arrested also sends a powerful message and symbol of non-violence. Sharing food and drink amongst each other also brings a sense of kindness and a sense of abundance, you know, as well as sustaining us. And then, of course, finally, just letting people know when it's appropriate that we're non-violent, so that we reassure them. Okay, sip of tea, and then we want to go on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a little bit about preparation for de-escalation or for any kind of high impact scenario, about your clothing and how you present yourself. So you shouldn't wear jewelry, especially long dangly earrings would be a really bad idea. Don't wear your hair in a ponytail or in any kind of style that invites somebody to grab you by the hair. Cut your fingernails to avoid them being broken or accidentally scratching someone if you're being taken out of the road or something. Wear comfortable and regular normal clothing rather than something that's a bit hippie or theatrical, to enable people to sort of be able to identify with you. This is a person that's like us, you know, and so you want to be, you know, fitting into normal society as far as that's possible with the clothes that you wear. But obviously you need to be careful, need to be comfortable. That will support you in your action. And you can also provide a bit of extra protection to yourself by using a bit of padding at the knees and the elbows, and you can use large plasters for that. But don't wear protective padding on the outside unless you're, well, we'll come on to the next point now, that if you are going to be doing a lot of one-to-one de-escalating, that's the role you're playing in the group, and you find it hard to squat down, what you could do is wear knee pads. So maybe it's acceptable to wear those on the outside, or you could bring a piece of a camping mat or a gardening mat and kneel on that. It's important not to wear padding very obviously on the outside, because if some of us are wearing padding and some of us aren't, and the police see the padding and think that they can just mishandle us because we've got the padding, and then somebody else maybe doesn't have that, you know. Plus it also, you know, it's our vulnerability that gives us our power. And so we don't want to get in the way of presenting ourselves as soft bodies in the way of the traffic. That needs to be visible. And then finally, just there's a few other considerations that you might want to take on board. Not quite so important, but for example, avoiding wearing black, because black is imposing authority. If you you might notice that the door of number 10 Downing Street is painted black, as an example. And to avoid wearing yellow and black, because that's a universal signal for toxicity in nature. So for example, wasps. And you'll notice that all the signs that you see on things that have toxins in them, they're all done in yellow and black, because this is a signal that we all notice. It's really good to choose warm colours. So orange, sort of warm browns, for example. And red is a bit of a one, not quite sure what to say about that, because red generally signifies danger, but it also means stop. So in our case, it might actually be quite a good idea to wear red. So I'll leave it to your discernment which to do there. And then blue is a good colour to wear because it indicates trust. So you might notice that many uniforms are done in blue. So for example, nurses and the police all wear blue uniforms. In fact, the police that, I can't remember what they're called, but there's neighbourhood police that have this light blue bib over their uniform. You know, it's quite interesting that they do that in light blue. And then if you're wearing, the colours you're wearing are predominantly black or grey because that's convenient and that's just what you happen to have, what you can do is just add some warm colours via adding a scarf or a hat or something like that. And I would be inclined to avoid using heavy makeup because it can look a bit imposing and it can kind of create a barrier, which is not what you want to do. You don't want to be creating a barrier between yourself and anyone that you're de-escalating. Right, now the next thing, this is possibly one of the most important parts of the training, which is about taking the initiative to act in a given situation. You might be aware of the bystander phenomenon. Most people, and this is part of how we tend to be obedient, we tend to think that it's somebody else's job, somebody else's power to take the initiative, or that we somehow are not the right person to do it. So this is the bystander phenomenon. And what we want to call on in ourselves is the upstander phenomenon. So we're stepping forward to take action when we're called to do so. So on the next slide, here are some situations in which you might need to take the initiative. So you might need to let people know what's happening, and that might include drivers, police, media, and sometimes each other. You might need to give a press interview. You might need to do police liaison, and that those two tasks, you know, you probably already know in advance, or you should know in advance who is going to be doing those tasks. You might need to support somebody who's de-escalating and who's struggling, you know, even if it's not your task, you know, maybe you need to step in. So you have to have the initiative to do that. You might need to intercept when somebody's being beaten up. So we'll come to that later, what to do in that scenario. You might need to support a driver who's being arrested. So not something that you might immediately think of. So you need to be flexible enough to think widely about what might be needed of you. And getting the group to allow emergency vehicles through. Alerting the police of an attack by a driver. And as we're doing this, we have to remember that we're not going to be pressing charges if something like that should happen. We can reassure the driver by informing them of this. And then that also has a way to take the tension out of the situation. So in taking the initiative, the most important thing is to actually do it, you know, to be an upstander and not a bystander. And if you can't do this for any reason, sorry, let me rewind. Yeah, so you want to be taking the initiative, and you can also do something to support you in doing this by getting the people who are around you to either join in or support you in carrying out whatever tactic you happen to be using in that moment. So they just need to copy you or be in support of you in some way. Not coming too close to you necessarily, but being somewhere visible, contactable if they're needed. Now, some people may be more vulnerable or maybe more at risk in doing a de-escalation role than other people. And so everybody needs to reflect on what's wise and what's safe for them to take the initiative. And particularly thinking of BIPOC people, as in Black, Indigenous, people of colour, and also young men are probably more likely to be at risk. So, and anybody that typically experiences prejudice. We live in a prejudiced society, and anyone who de-escalates, who typically experiences prejudice, may be at risk. So you need to bear that in mind and think about whether you're the right person to do it, and that has to be your decision. If your hearing isn't so good, or your English isn't so fluent, if it isn't your first language, you may not be the best person to take on de-escalation as your main role. And if for any reason you don't feel able to take the initiative, or you think it might be too risky for you, then please do respect your own reasons and boundaries, and respect your limits on your confidence. That's your decision, and we all must respect each other in this. If you're one of those people and you feel able to ask someone else to take the initiative, then that's a good alternative. And if that doesn't feel possible either, well, that's okay too. We all have our different contributions to bring to our situation. Women, it must be said, women are probably the least likely to be at risk during de-escalation, and especially older women. Anyone who looks like they might be somebody's mother or somebody's grandmother is likely to accrue a fair amount of respect from people. So now we're going to do an exercise in how to take the initiative. So the intention of this exercise is to go past your ego. So I bet many of you will be thinking in these situations, I can't do that. You know, you'll be probably having the bystander kind of response. This isn't the right thing for me to do. So this is your ego, and you need to go past it. Your ego will definitely not serve you in stepping up to take the initiative. It won't help you if you bluster forward either with a sense of importance, and it won't help you if you tend to sort of shrink away from the task. So what we need to do here is we need to go past ego, not because it's something bad, because your ego is something really necessary. It's how we're wired up to keep ourselves safe. And that's fine. But in this particular task, it doesn't serve you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a guided meditation to help you to find the best resources in you to take the initiative in a situation. So settle yourself down somewhere comfortable. You can keep your eyes open during this. You can take a meditation position if you find that helpful, or just sit comfortably on the chair with your back upright as possible, and relax your shoulders, and you might want to just move them a little bit and stretch your neck a little bit, and you can keep your eyes open so that you can keep your peripheral vision aware as well, because this is what you will have to do in the situation. You won't be able to close your eyes. You need to have your senses alert at all times. So keep your eyes open. Find a spot to rest your gaze on, but keep the peripheral awareness open as well. And now I invite you to just feel into the sense of your breath. Feel your breathing in and out. And particularly noticing the out breath. And as you breathe out, you can let go of any areas of tension or holding. So you can breathe into the area of tension. And then as you breathe out, you can just let that tension go. So another way to relax your body very quickly is to imagine you're slipping into a delicious, warm and fragrant bath. And you might want to let out and at the same time. That's what I do anyway when I get into a nice bath. It's a very good way of relaxing. And now invite you to put your left hand on your heart. This is something that activates the right brain, the right side of the brain, which supports your sense of connection. So that's a really good thing to do. And tuning back into your breath. And now I invite you to recall something that you really love about this world. Maybe it's a landscape, a place that you go to, a favorite garden, somewhere that you went to as a child. And just feel into how much you want that place to be safe and protected. And imagine the next generations and feel into how much you want them to be safe and protected, and how much you want this beautiful place that you love so much to be available to them. And now I'd like you to imagine or call to mind someone from the past who has particularly inspired you. Maybe it's somebody you knew in reality, but it might even be a hero that you just heard about and didn't actually know. It could even be a fictitious hero from a story you've read. Give you a moment to decide who you want to choose. And now I'd like you to feel into your deep respect and your gratitude for that person. And feel into the warmth of their being, their light shining on you. And imagine that they're passing the torch on to you now. They gave something to the world themselves, making them a person that inspires you now. And now it's your turn, and they're passing the torch to you. So now it's your responsibility to take up from them. And now I'd like you to imagine the grandeur of the sky at night, filled with stars. And here we are together on a planet circling through space, on this beautiful blue pearl of a planet whose mantle of life is so deeply threatened. And just at the same time being aware of the grandeur of that open, expansive sky at night. And yet feeling into how the life of each and every being on this planet counts. Every life form, every being has its place. And you can be a protector of those beings now for life on Earth. So these are qualities that can really support us in taking the initiative. And you might feel called by a sense of longing to protect this Earth, or by the magnitude of the emergency that we're facing. So one quality that will really serve you, and maybe you're feeling this now as you sit here in a relaxed state, the quality that you might be able to connect with most at this moment is the sense of humility. Humility that you feel when you see the night sky filled with stars, or when you see someone from the past who's inspired you, or when you think of something that you really love about this world. Brings a sense of humility. And this is something that can really serve you when you're taking the initiative in some way, because you're acting not just for yourself, but for this whole rebellion that we're part of, this whole action, that you're doing this for the Earth, to honor your ancestors and to serve the future generations. And there's real power in this humility. And it's not your power though, but it's there on loan for you to use. It's a resource that you can draw from. So this exercise, you can come back to the workshop now, and just be aware that the exercise that we just did is a way of tuning in to that sense of humility, and also to be aware that with that sense of humility, it's actually possible to fail, and for that to be okay, because what we're asking of ourselves and each other is just to do our best, to be and do our best, and the magnitude of the emergency that we're facing, that's all it's asking. It's asking us to be the best that we can be. Okay, so now we're going to move into looking at some de-escalation tactics. So one of the tactics you can use is to, I've already mentioned, singing. And if you want to get the group to sing, it's also useful to get everyone to be quiet first. And this brings me to another tactic, which is to get everybody to fall quiet. And you may already be familiar with the idea that you fall quiet yourself and you raise your hand and you try to get all the people that are nearest to you to do the same, to also fall quiet, and then let it spread. And this is a really useful technique to get quiet quickly. And you can practice in your group to train in this in advance. So you all know that code, that if you see someone else with their hand up and they've fallen quiet, that you need to do the same. So once you've got the quiet, you need to start the song, or you can have somebody in the group who will take on the role of being a song carrier and learn a few simple songs to lead the group. And one thing, you know, if you're not very good at songs and you can't think of anything else, a good standby is to just gently sing something like peace, love, respect. So like going be love, respect, peace, love, respect. Or you might be able to find something that's a bit less hippie than that. Anyway, I leave that to your taste. So you come up with a very simple chant like that and just keep it going. But songs are good. One thing that you shouldn't use, I don't know if you've ever heard, if you've been part of the rebellion, Extinction Rebellion actions on the street, you might be familiar with people singing, "Police, we love you." Okay, so this is something that we don't advise people to do because it creates tension and it alienates a lot of people, and also some police actually experience it as being rather manipulative, so don't use that one. Okay, so there's another song that you can use, but this one is only for aggressive police because it's a little bit pokey. But if you sing it, it can be very effective. And it's particularly useful in a situation of police violence. And it has the effect of exposing the violence while simultaneously de-escalating by suggestion. So it goes, we're non-violent, and how about you? That's all it is. It's very easy to remember. And you can sing that to the melody of John Lennon's "All We Are Saying is Give Peace a Chance." You might know that one. So you're singing, "We are non-violent, and how about you? We are non-violent, and how about you?" And you just keep that going. And it's quite powerful because it's quite gentle, and it's stating what we are. We're non-violent, and it asks this question. So when you ask a question, you're kind of getting whoever you're asking the question to think about what they're doing. You know, even if only for a few seconds, they think about their own behavior. And in that moment, it might help to calm them down a little bit, or reflect on what they're doing and how it comes across. So this chant was used in Seattle in 1999. It's got a history, and it was very, very effective in extreme situations when the police were using tear gas, pepper spray, rubber bullets, etc. And people were able to maintain the non-violence by using all sorts of different tactics. And one of them was singing that chant when the police were being aggressive. A nice bit of history there. Okay, so now we're coming to how to do one-to-one de-escalation of drivers. And we're going to be looking at how to get calm and how to ground yourself. So hopefully you're still feeling a little bit calm and grounded from the previous exercise that we did about initiation. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk you through these practices, and it's good if you do them as I talk you through. So have a little meditative session again. And we need the next slide up now. And the slide is going to go through the different techniques, because I'm going to take you through a number of practices. And the idea here is for you to try all of them for a little while, and then choose whichever works best for you. And it's worth giving them a little bit of time. Even if you at first think, oh, that's not one for me, give it the benefit of the doubt and try it for a bit longer, and just make sure that it isn't something that would work really well for you. Okay, so got the first slide, and it's about first point is about just breathing out. So just making contact with your breath as we did before, tuning into the breathing. And then as you breathe out, just make the out breath slightly longer than your in breath. And this has a very, very good calming effect. And it also helps you to slow your breath down. When you slow your breath down, you also have an effect on the rest of your body. It will help to slow your heartbeat and bring relaxation into your muscles. So the next one is to ground yourself by noticing how the ground or the chair, if you're sitting on the chair, is meeting your feet or your bum, and how it's taking your weight. And just feel into the connection between yourself and the ground. Feel your feet as if that's all there is to do. Nothing else to do but to feel that meeting point. And letting the earth, gravity, do the job of holding you, and just letting your body sink into the ground or into the seat. Of course, you can combine some of these practices. So you might want to begin by grounding and then connect with the breath as we did at the beginning. Another simple thing that you can do is to fold your hands protectively just below your navel, because this gives a subconscious message to your body to relax. So when you hold that position, your body will slightly relax. If you bring your attention to it, it will relax a little bit more. And then as you're doing that, you can feel into the whole body breathing. Imagine that your breathing is going into the whole of your body as you breathe in. And as you breathe out, you're emptying the breath from the whole body. And for this, it can be really useful to imagine that you can breathe beyond your own physical body boundaries. So imagine that you can breathe through your skin, through your feet into the ground. Imagine that you can breathe through your head, expanding out to the side, the front and the back. Breathe through your arms. So imagine the whole body collectively now. Whole body breathing. Okay, now on the next slide. This one we've already had once. Imagine that you're slipping into a delicious, warm and fragrant bath. Imagine the sensation of letting go, letting your weight be held by the water. Another physical one is to just shake out the tension in all of your limbs. Shake your hands, shake your feet, your legs. Another one is to tap the body all over gently with a soft fist. I'm doing it right now as I'm talking to you. Just soft, gentle, supple fist, tapping gently all over the body. Another thing that you can do that's useful is to just notice in your immediate environment, is there a source of support for you right now? Is there an object of some kind, a reassuring item of your belongings or your clothing? You could look out for your favorite color. You could look out for nature, for trees or plants nearby. You could look out for your affinity group, for your buddy. anything that supports you, and just notice, and that will bring a sense of support to you. And then going to the next slide. In fact, actually don't go to the next slide, because this is one that I want to demonstrate to you physically. So this is a way to expand and widen your field of vision in a way that can bring ease. Because when we're scared, we tend to narrow our vision. So what you want to do is focus on something, an object straight ahead of you. So I'm looking at you now, I'm looking at the little dot of the camera that I can see. And as I do that, as I keep my focus on that, if I put my hands out, my arms out like this, like as though embracing, and wiggle my fingers, I can move my arms to a position where I can just about see them wiggling, see the movement there. And yet at the same time, you'll notice that I'm still looking straight in front of me at the camera. So if you'd like to practice that, what this does is it's broadening your sense of vision and yet enabling you to still maintain focused. So you can keep your attention on what's around you, which is really important when you're on an action. And at the same time, you can tune in to what feels expansive and what brings a sense of ease. So that's something that you can do very quickly. It's a great one to do as you're approaching a driver to de-escalate, is to just widen your field of vision. And at the same time, you can take a glance into the car and have a look at the people that you're about to go and see and get a sense of what they look like and what mood they might be in. So really good way to expand your awareness in a way that's supportive. So the idea is that's the end of those techniques. So the idea is to choose one of those techniques that I've just described, or use as many of the tools that I've described as work for you, and try and practice them until it becomes second nature. So, you know, any moment that you have when you can do that, when you're waiting for the kettle to boil or waiting for a bus or something like that, you can practice one of these tools. Very useful, not just for actions, but in general life, really useful tools. So now we're going to go into the next slide. And we're going to do a little exercise of imagining by way of preparation to going to do some one-to-one de-escalation. So you know that you can maybe stand up for this if you want. Might be a quite useful way to do it. And just imagine yourself speaking to a driver who's been stopped. So let's do this slowly. We're going to do it in a rather a slow way, which obviously you'd have to do it much faster in the situation, but let's do it in a slow way so that you can really learn how to connect with your body and your being, your face and your voice in a way that's going to be most helpful to you for the de-escalation. So you want your posture to be soft and open, with your arms relaxed and your hands open and visible. So that's your posture. You want your face to be soft, and you might occasionally glance at the driver, but you don't stare at them. You don't get into an eye-locking thing, just as you normally would. Perhaps you might notice when you're in conversation with someone that usually what you do is you glance occasionally at them. And most of the time you might be looking down or looking out into space. So it's keeping your face soft. And then your voice, you want to keep your voice slow, keep the tone of your voice down and the volume as low as you can to make sure that you can still be heard and speaking slowly. And then finally, you will have positioned yourself at a comfortable distance from the car that you can be heard, but just out of reach. So you give them space and you give yourself space. Also for this, it's really useful to squat down or to kneel on one knee. And the point of this is to bring you to be at the same level as the driver. So you don't want to be leaning over the driver in any way or speaking down to them in a way that might feel imposing. So if you get down to their level, it creates a situation of equality already before you start speaking. Okay, so now going to the next slide. I want to take you through one of the most important parts of this process, which is the 5 stages that you need to go through when you're de-escalating. And it would be really a good idea, we've got these on the slide, it would be really a good idea to learn these by heart and really practice remembering them with your group. You know, maybe you want to go through them at the beginning of every meeting. You could go through these 5 stages. Somebody could try to remember them all, and if they forget, others can help to remind them. And you might want to write these up on the flip chart at your training so that you can go through them and remember them. So when you do these, when you go through these stages, you obviously won't go through them in the same, necessarily in the same order as I'm suggesting. But for now, we'll go through them in an order that, you know, in an ideal situation, this is what you would do. But of course, you know, bear in mind that it won't happen like that in reality. But the point is for you to sort of really integrate the stages so that you don't have to think about the order of them. You just automatically know when to do each one from your own instinct. So the first one is to take a slow breath to calm you down. So if you're calm, you're going to be better placed to influence others. The second one is to remember the humanity of everybody, including these drivers. We're all just human. We're all involved in one way or another with some kind of struggle in life, and just to remember that. Third one is to listen to what they have to say about having their lives disrupted. And fourthly, as you listen, you can empathize with them. If they're angry or upset, you can empathize with their experience. And to do this authentically, don't just do it as by rote, you know, because that's what, you know, you're at the 4th stage of the 5 stages now. Really try to tune in. And this is going to come naturally from remembering their humanity, that you'll be more authentic in empathizing with them. If you've put yourself in their place, and you can make it clear that we're not taking action against them personally, and that they don't deserve to have their lives disrupted because the government won't act. And you can also say sorry, you know, so not that you're apologizing, but that they're caught up in this situation. You can say sorry that they're caught up in it, and express that in a, you know, as kind a way as you can. And then finally, before you explain to them what we're doing, ask first for permission. Ask for permission to explain why we're doing this and what we're doing. And remain calm, and you can explain the climate emergency and why we're acting the way we did. You can remember the climate emergency and explain to them why we're acting as we are. So a good way to do this is to just sort of say, well, you know, do you want to hear why we're doing what we're doing? And they might not want to hear it, and we should respect that their choice. So you ask them first. And finally, when you've done all of those things, when you finish the de-escalation, it's a good idea to debrief with your partner and reground yourself before you move on to the next person. And the final point that's really important is, if you notice that you're making things worse, just withdraw. And remember that at any point in this state, in these 5 stages, when you're interacting, you can always withdraw from the situation and just move on to the next person. Or you can swap with your buddy, you know, maybe they might do better in connecting with that person than you do for whatever reason. So the next slide, we're going to explore what this might actually look like when it's playing out in a situation. So I'd like you to imagine that you're a de-escalator and you're addressing the driver seated in the car. The point of this exercise is not to learn all the stages word by word, as we've just done, or stage by stage, but to just get a sense of the intentions and the general principles and to integrate them. So you might want to practice this. And we'll be practicing it when you do the person-to-person, face-to-face training. You'll have a chance to practice this. But this is just, you know, what it will look like for you to just have in your awareness. So you take a slow, easy breath as you approach slowly, and you tune in as you're approaching to how they look. What's their expression? And you try to gauge how they might be feeling. You don't stare at them, but you try to take it in with a brief glance. And then you position yourself just close enough to be close, you know, to be out of reach, but just close enough to be heard. You're squatting down or you're kneeling on one knee in order to create a sense of equality with the driver, and showing that you want to be sort of on a level with them in the sense of being truthful as well, you know, that you're willing to go to meet them. It sort of sends that signal. It's a good idea to be ready to speak first. So you're ready with what you're going to say, but of course, if they speak first, that's fine. You can greet them in a polite and friendly way. And just ask how they're doing, you know, how they're getting on, being stuck here. And then you listen whilst empathizing authentically. And they might not answer very much to you. So then you can just go straight to the follow-up question. And you can ask if they'd like to know what's going on. And when you do this, when you respond to their question, you explain what you think they would be most likely to want to know, rather than going into something about climate change. So they're probably going to want to know, how long are they going to be stuck here and what's going to happen next? So you can respond to their questions with those responses first. And then you can ask, you could ask if everything's okay, as it can be in given this, you know, unpleasant situation that we're all in. If you can help with anything, and again, listen to what they say. Another thing you can do at this point is offer them some fruit or snacks or water if they need any of that. Or, you know, if they're all right, you know, they know that they can maybe give you a wave or ask you for it at any point. And then finally, the last thing, ask if they'd like to know what the action is about. And at this point, you can also offer them a leaflet that explains it. And then they've got something to look at whilst they're sitting in the car. If they don't want to know anything about it, and they don't want to accept the leaflet, just accept that graciously. Don't try to push the leaflet. Don't bombard them with information. Be sensitive to what they want to hear. Okay, so that's the end of that slide. And now I want to demonstrate to you with my own body how you can protect yourself from attack. So one thing that you can do if a driver is being aggressive is you can just sit down. And of course that has the effect of putting you out of reach of their arms, and it gives some distance and some space to the situation. If you do this, you should also be aware that you could be kicked. So a way to deal with that is to maybe position yourself so that there's a bag between you and the aggressor, so that you know that's in the way of them kicking you if they're aggressive. So if they're attacking you, you can adopt this posture. So you wrap put your hands around your head with your hands interlocked at the back of the neck. I'm showing you the back of my neck now. This area at the base of your skull is a really vulnerable area that needs to be protected. So you can interlock your fingers to provide a bit of protection there. Tuck your chin in. And you can also squat down with your knees towards your face. And if you fall, it's a good idea to fall to the right, because then you're protecting your liver when you're lying on the ground. And the other thing is to maintain some eye contact with the aggressor, and also to speak to them and tell them that they're hurting you in a way that's loud enough also to be heard by others, so they know what's going on. So once again, don't stare at the aggressor, but just have some intermittent eye contact that enables some contact to be made. Okay, so now, I should just also say about that way of protecting yourself. Some people take the view that nonviolence should be completely passive, and they may prefer not to use a protection like that. And of course, that's a valid, completely valid way to approach things. So you might want to think about whether you want to use that protection or not, and respect each other's choices about that. Okay, so now to look at some positions, different positions to adopt for the various scenarios that you're likely to encounter. So when you're speaking with drivers and passengers, the ideal kind of scenario when you're speaking with them is that there's a number of different ways to meet the different situations. So that's what I'm going to try to explain now with some possibilities. And you might want to just make some notes of these as well. So one of them is to, if in a situation where a driver is standing and is angry and aggressive and addressing all the rebels who are actually seated. So the driver's standing, the rebels are seated. In this particular case, the best thing to do is to stay seated, to be out of reach. Another situation is if a driver is seen to be approaching the blockade, but doesn't look angry. They're just approaching, they just look fairly relaxed and normal. So in this scenario, it would be good if the de-escalator gets up and walks to meet the driver, paying attention to that relaxed open posture, hands open and visible, keeping your face soft, occasionally glancing, And in a situation like this, it's appropriate to maybe smile mildly, but don't grin or look happy, look as though you're overly enjoying yourself. Just a mild smile is friendly. And then as you're walking to meet them, don't walk too far away from the others. You want to stay easily within sight and reach. So why would you do this? Well, because when someone enters a room, normally, in a normal situation, it's polite to stand up and to welcome them. So the body language here is saying, I recognize you, I welcome you, and I greet you. And it's bearing in mind that this is a driver who's not looking angry. So there's no reason not to treat them with politeness and recognition and welcome. There's also, there's something about the body language that is beneficial to walk to actually meet someone, because they're making themselves vulnerable in coming to speak with you in this situation. And so there's something about going to meet them that is signaling that you're supporting them in this context. And then if possible, you can speak first if that feels right, just as you would if you were opening a door to a stranger. You'd say hello, you'd say, hello, what can I do for you, or something like that. Or when you answer the phone, hello, how can I help you? And then if, in addition to all the interactions that you would have, if they seem friendly, continue to seem friendly, you can always invite them to stay and have a chat. They might want to hear more about the action. But if you do that, it's important to remind them for their own safety that they're breaking the law by being outside the car. And, to bear in mind, we're doing this because we're willing to be arrested if that happens, and they might not welcome it. So just to remind them of that. Now, if a driver is seen approaching the blockade and they look angry and you see them on the approach, at this point, it's probably a good idea to stand up. And, in the same way as before, you want to be reaching towards them and establishing a sense of equality by standing up and being on the level with them. But only move to the edge of the blockade area. Don't move any further away. So you're still close to your mates. But you're kind of going towards them by standing up and moving to the edge there, which is, it's a de-escalation to move towards someone like that. And they're, at this point, they're still approaching. They're not close to you. And of course, at this point, you also maintain an open posture. You keep your hands open and visible, your face soft, occasionally glancing again. And in this case, you don't smile, but rather you feel into a sense of concern for that driver. So if you go in your mind, you're remembering their humanity. How are they feeling? They look angry, and feel into a sense of concern of why they might be angry. And that will automatically give you a concerned expression on your face, which is appropriate to meeting this situation. And you're standing up, so that's a gesture of politeness, recognizing them, and you're engaging them at the same level. But because they're already looking angry, it's really important to be ready to sit down as soon as it starts to get more aggressive or highly charged. Because if they're looking aggressive, starting to be aggressive towards you and they're close, you don't want to be looking as though you're squaring up to them in some way that could be provocative. So during the in-person training, you're going to have a chance to act these scenarios out and see how they actually feel. And finally, just because we've been through a sort of tense situation now, and you should do this when you've been on the face-to-face training. It's really a good idea just to notice again the ground, meeting your feet or your bum, noticing that contact as you are right now, feeling gravity doing its work and letting your weight drop into that connection with the ground. And to breathe out slowly, making your out breath longer than your in breath to calm you. And finally, feeling into the whole body breathing, imagining you can breathe into your own body boundaries. And here we are at the end of this Zoom training. And I hope that's been useful to you and that you will be able to put these exercises into practice when you're all together, training together, doing role plays and so on. And that will be the next stage that you need to go on to. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.